In this short video, what we want to do is take a look at the whiteboard feature within the Zoom meeting environment. I do want to show you what the whiteboard feature looks like if I'm using a PC and what the whiteboard feature looks like if I'm using an iPad and the Zoom app on that iPad. Before we discuss just some of the specifics of how to maneuver and utilize the whiteboard, let's just discuss for a moment why we would use the whiteboard in an engagement hour with students. Material that I teach is mathematics, and being able to use a whiteboard in a math course is extremely advantageous as it makes it so much simpler for me to be able to write mathematical symbols that wouldn't be readily available on a keyboard. Of course, there's other disciplines where that would apply as well. So what's an advantage of using the whiteboard in that Zoom meeting environment is I still have the ability to engage with my students utilizing the chat feature and allowing them to be able to raise their hand, other things of that nature. So let's take a look at what this would look like in that regard. Now I am using a PC at the moment and I've launched my Zoom meeting, and I'm going to choose to share the screen. I'm going to choose the whiteboard feature. So once the whiteboard feature comes up, you can see I have a pen that I can write with. And some of the basics that we'll look at the menu up here, we have the drawing feature, and we can use a pen. This is a highlighter, right? So if I use a pen, I can then go to Format, choose the color, and choose the width of the pen that I would like to write with. Under that draw menu, I also have a highlighter. I can choose the color of my highlighter and its thickness, and then I can highlight text. And also under that draw menu, I have a couple other options. I can draw lines and rays and specific geometric shapes, some that are solid, some that are empty, and some that are transparent. Within this Zoom meeting as well, I can choose to enter text and click where I would like to write some text in that case. And I can choose the select tool if I want to select that specific object and maybe move it around on the screen. Some other kind of cool features on the PC is I can place a check mark next to something that I want to address or some other symbols. And then there's a spotlight tool. This looks kind of like a flashlight, and the point about this is really to bring the attention of students to a specific point on the screen. So it's basically giving me almost like a little flashlight to draw students' attentions to something that I'm speaking about. Now I like the spotlight feature because instead of having to go to my pen and say, okay, 2 minutes ago we discussed this thing, without having to write on my paper again, I'm able to use the spotlight to just highlight something that I mentioned. We could also spotlight something with an arrow by stamping, take a look at this, and we can draw the attention back to that later. Anything that I do specifically, I can click to undo or redo. Now the one last piece that we'll see in this menu here is I can clear all drawings or just my drawings, and then I can save all of the whiteboard. Now at any point in time that I'm maneuvering and I'm discussing with students here, right, students have the ability to raise their hand. So if a student raises their hand, I'm going to see a pop-up in the other upper right-hand corner, and then I would be able to look at the participants through the Manage Participant feature. And then I would be able to say, okay, student, you had a question. What is your question? And then I could acknowledge that I've raised their hand, right? I can lower their hand and engage with them. I still have all the same meeting organizational tools up here at the top. I can even open the chat and do some other features here. As I write on my whiteboard, let me go back to my draw tool just to show you down here in the bottom right hand corner is the plus sign, so I can add a new page and continue to write. Next to the addition button, I can move back through each of my prior pages to revisit them as necessary. Now, in order to use a typical laptop without a writing surface, what I need to do is purchase a writing tablet, which easily plugs into any laptop. These are plug and play. Probably the most common brand is called a Wacom tablet. So you can see a picture of the Wacom tablet here, and this has a little pen and then a digital space that I can write on, and that allows me to use the whiteboard feature within that Zoom meeting if I don't already have whiteboard writing capability on my laptop. Of course, I wouldn't really want to try to write on a whiteboard using a mouse. That would be rather difficult. Now let's take a look at how we would utilize the whiteboard on the iPad app. Now on an iPad with an iPad Pencil, once I've hosted the Zoom meeting, in the upper right corner I can click to share content and choose the whiteboard. Now within the app on an iPad, I still have the ability to open the chat. I also still have the availability to manage participants, to see hands raised, to be able to acknowledge students and answer their questions at any point in time during this engagement. Now you'll notice the tools are a little different than on the PC, and I don't have as many tools as possible on the whiteboard. If you look down at the very bottom of our whiteboard, we have the far left is the pencil option, and then I can change the color of my pencil, and I can change the thickness of my pencil as well. And so I can write math symbols for my students as necessary. Some of the other tools that I see down at the bottom is the eraser. I can erase anything that I have written here. And then I can also add text by clicking the T button. And then I can type and communicate via text if I feel necessary there as well. Also have, the icon that looks like a flashlight. I have the spotlight feature, so I can spotlight things on my students without actually writing on the board. And then the last icon down there is the select icon, where I would just tap and drag to select a specific item to be able to move it around on the screen as well. If we look in the very bottom right-hand corner, the three dots, the ellipses, I can create a new whiteboard and begin with my pen to write on the new whiteboard there. So if I need some extra space, I can always create a new whiteboard. And then you'll notice that once I've created two whiteboards, I can view all whiteboards and go back and revisit a prior whiteboard if I like. Now, one small negative feature on the iPad here, excuse me, is if I go up to the share and I stop sharing, when I come back to the whiteboard, all of those whiteboards are gone. There's no way for me to bring those whiteboard features back up. So one thing I can do is if I'm writing and I create a second page and I write some more, before I stop sharing the whiteboard, what I would want to do is choose the Save to Photos option that I see in that menu there. Now that would allow me to save all of my whiteboards as images, and then I could share with my students and upload these whiteboard images into my Canvas space. If I'm on a laptop or a PC, when I stop sharing the whiteboard, it actually keeps those whiteboard pages available so that when I go back to sharing the whiteboard, they come back up and repopulate. So just food for thought that if you're using the iPad app, you just want to make sure you're careful before you stop sharing that you save those whiteboard pages. So by using the whiteboard feature, whether we're using it on an iPad app with an Apple Pencil or we're using it on a PC or a laptop with a digital writing board, this is an excellent tool in which we can engage students, be able to write things on the board that would typically not be possible unless we had some form of an equation editor, which would even still be somewhat tedious. And within that whiteboard environment, we still have all the same tools like the chat, being able to have students raise their hand, and even having students annotate. I could share the board with them and they could write on there as well. So some really unique ways that I can engage students.